Hello, and welcome to the Get Lean and Eat Clean podcast. My name is Brian Grin. I'm a certified health coach, trainer, and author. And this podcast is for middle-aged men and women looking to optimize their health and get their bodies back to what it once was 10 to 15 years ago. I will give you simple, actionable items to get long-term sustainable results. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. All right. Welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. Hope you're having a great Tuesday. My name is Brian Grin, and today we're going to discuss a fun topic, fasting and fat loss. I know fasting to you might not be exciting, but it's one of my favorite topics. And today we're going to discuss a little bit about the science behind it, and then I'll give you some tips at the end. The bottom line is fasting, in my opinion, is one of the healthiest and easiest ways to reduce obesity, but also to get in what's called fat burning mode. And essentially, this mode could take time depending on your eating history. Regarding the science behind it, before you burn fat, you have to release the fatty acids into your bloodstream through a process called lipolysis. Now, this process gets transported to your mitochondria, and then from there, it gets oxidized into energy. So I know you probably don't care too much about the science behind it, but this process of lipolysis can take time depending on your eating history, perhaps a bit genetics. But the bottom line is getting into fat burning mode could take a week. It could take a month. If you are very dependent on, high carb, eating all the time, reliant on glucose, you never really used your fat stores for energy, this could take some time. On the other hand, if you have done some fasting and you're eating pretty clean, then it's a lot easier to get into fat burning mode. So for me, when I first started fasting, it did take some time. I had a lot of hunger pains through the process, but once you get sort of through that sort of, I don't know, like that window, and you start getting into fat burning mode, a lot of the times, you sort of control when you want to eat, and it really just gives you freedom and flexibility. You're not tied down by the clock, and it's something that I think is so powerful with fasting. So what is, what's behind this? And one of the hormones that's so important when it comes to fasting in life in general is something called insulin. And essentially, in order to control insulin, you have to sort of take two things into account. One is what you're eating. Okay, that's going to determine how high your insulin is going to spike. And then the second thing is when you're eating, and that's going to determine how persistent insulin is throughout the day. Now, insulin is not a bad thing. First of all, it does a lot of great things with cells. It's anabolic, helps you grow. But if you're getting too much of it, then that's not a good thing. Just like anything else. So essentially, how can we control insulin? Well, one is what we eat, which gets talked a lot about, right? And like I mentioned before, second thing is when we're eating. If you're snacking all the time and you sort of get up and eat right away and then eat until before you go to bed, that is not a good thing. I would say a first tip would be maybe just pick a time to stop eating at night. And that could be 7 or 8 o'clock. I would say give yourself at least 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed. I definitely don't like to eat too late. So essentially, there's a lot of talk about what you're eating, and if you just focus on when you're eating right off the bat, it'll make things a lot better. And then you can get into what you're eating, because essentially, if you're having let's just say a lot of vegetable oils and high fructose corn syrup and sugar and things that are going to raise insulin, it's going to make the fasting a lot more difficult. And I've talked about this in the past. But if you can just base your meals around quality protein and healthy fats, it's going to make fasting easier, and you're going to be able to get into fat burning mode and to eventually lose body fat. And that's the whole goal. That's the goal with this podcast. And essentially, if you can learn how to control those two things that I mentioned, it can go a long way. One of the things that gets brought up to me quite a bit is, when they talk about fasting, people think of malnutrition. Well, by no means are you going to be malnourished unless you're underweight. less than, let's say, 4% body fat, and pregnant, and let's say underage, then, fasting is a great tool to use. Obviously, you want to have a coach or a health professional to help guide you, especially if you're brand new to it. I came out with a 21-day fasting challenge.com. If you want to check that out, that sort of eases you into the fast. And that's what I recommend for all my clients. There's no reason to jump head first and have a bad experience. You want to sort of, let's say, push back breakfast, stop eating dinner at a certain time, and then, take advantage of the overnight fast that we all do, obviously when we're sleeping. So the bottom line is ease into it, and essentially you'll start getting more used to it. For me, I remember it took time, and essentially I was a healthy eater at first, and never did fasting. But once I did fasting, it sort of was a game changer, and it sort of took my health to the next level. So I would just say this: the only thing that you want to keep an eye on is micronutrients, essentially potassium, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus. These are micronutrients that perhaps when you start fasting you might lack, but for unless you're doing like really long-term fast, I wouldn't worry so much about it. I would say that an easy sort of tip to not have to worry about that is just start adding some good quality salt to your meals and perhaps into your water. I do some mineral drops from time to time, so it's easy, and essentially you're going to get those micronutrients from that. Also, the last thing I'll say is that, with fasting is you want to stay busy, right? If you have a day where you're just going to be, not a lot going on, you're going to probably want to eat more. But if you have a busy day, that's a good time to sort of do some fasting. So keep that in mind. Drink plenty of tea and coffee. I would say you don't have to go crazy with it, and obviously you don't want to drink too much caffeine before bed. But those are great tips. Also, sparkling water does well to sort of help those hunger cues come and go, because that's what they do. These hunger cues will come and go, and eventually, that's not to say you're not going to be hungry from time to time when you do fasting. You will, but you'll be able to control it more, and it'll come and it'll just go within, let's say, 30 minutes, maybe even less. So fasting and fat loss, it's a powerful tool. Give it a try. Let me know if you have questions, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. And yeah, thanks so much for listening, and I will talk to you next week. Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I understand there are millions of other podcasts out there, and you've chosen to listen to mine, and I appreciate that. Check out the show notes at briangrin.com for everything that was mentioned in this episode. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend or family member that's looking to get their body back to what it once was. Thanks again, and have a great day.